Hello everyone. What we're going to talk in this first lab theory tutorial is some basic concept of safety and how to also keep record of all the experiments you're going to be doing in a lab. So we'll first start by talking about safety. So when we talk about safety, the first thing you should learn is how can you prevent any emergency before they even happen. The best way, so we'll talk about dress code, how to properly dress in a lab, how to behave in a lab, how to plan in case of an emergency happens before it happens. So by looking around the lab, finding where the important safety equipment is located. And then we'll talk a little bit how the WHMIS or Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System allows you to prevent some accident by knowing in advance the type of material you're working with. And then we'll talk about how you would deal if an actual emergency would take place in a lab. And finally, we'll talk about the documentation, how to the standards to properly record the experiment that you do in the lab. So, safety. I couldn't find a better quote to describe the importance of lab safety or prevention of emergency than the one by Benjamin Franklin that you can see right here. It says 1 ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Is it true? It's true, in fact, that more than 90% of the accidents happening in the lab are due by lack of prevention. They could have been easily prevented by following very basic procedures. Obviously, following procedures doesn't prevent everything. Things will happen also because you might be careful, but maybe not your classmate or your colleague when you work might not be that safe, but 90% can be prevented by just safely working in a lab. So starting, how do you prevent emergency in the lab? Well, the first thing is by dressing properly. You want to prevent any spilling on yourself or any possible other accident affecting your body. So how would you properly dress in a lab? Well, first thing, and you already know this, I'm sure, you gotta wear is a lab coat. A lab coat has the goal to protect your skin and clothes all the way to your wrist and all the way to basically the bottom of your legs. So a lab coat should be up to at least the knees, and it should be used properly by not bringing up the sleeves. I see rolled up sleeves all the time. No, the sleeves have to go down all the way to the wrist all the time. And obviously a lab coat has to be properly buttoned in the front. Together with that, you need to use safety glasses to protect your eyes. Now, there are different types of safety glasses. So the industry standards are now the one on the top here. They have the big advantage that completely basically seal all the space around your eyes using foam. They still allow for some air exchange on the top, but they have this big advantage of really protecting very well both the side and the front. In our labs, you're still allowed to use the older style, like this one. However, the important thing that you have to keep in mind is that they have to be able to protect both the front and the side as well with a single piece. Okay, in the old days, we used to allow glasses like in these comics here and allow students to wear shields put inside the side of the glasses. However, now we don't allow them anymore because the shields can actually slide around and leave some important gaps. And obviously that will lead to safety concerns. So you have to wear either this type or this type right here. Now, together with that, we don't allow the use of contact lenses, even if you are wearing safety goggles. And the reason is that potentially toxic chemicals can accumulate in the space between the contact lens and your cornea at concentration which are higher than the one you would think they are in the air. So they could be potentially damaging your cornea. Another thing, even if you use your glasses, you still have to wear safety glasses on top of that. Now, under the lab coat, you're supposed to wear something. Now, you're supposed to wear, obviously, your clothes. And when it comes to legs, please do not wear shorts. Okay, again, the goal is to protect all your skin in the lab from any potential hazardous exposure. So you have to wear long pants or a long skirt that goes all the way to your ankles here. Together with that, you have to wear proper shoes. Oftentimes we use the wrong, at least in my own opinion, wrong definition of closed-toe shoes, which technically means shoes that do cover the toes. However, not all shoes that cover the toes would work. Here you have some example. Obviously, sandals are a no. But then these shoes here, the ballerina shoes, are closed-toe shoes. However, they still leave too much space here between your ankle and the rest of the foot, so exposed. Even if you wear socks, socks are made of absorbent material. They would not be allowed. These shoes would not be allowed, even with socks. Same thing for these type of shoes. These are made of material that can absorb liquids. So theoretically, your shoes should also be made by water or liquid repellent material. Okay. In some case, we can close our eyes in that sense. Now, together with that, also no high heels, please. These are a serious safety concern. You will be worried more about being balanced than properly handling the chemicals in the lab. Finally, if you have long hair, you need to tie them back on the back. This is a serious, serious concern. There's been actually a lethal accident in the early 2010s, with actually a student at Yale University, if I'm correct, that actually died because she didn't tie the hair. Speaking of preventing accidents, she didn't tie her hair, and that was caught by a machine, which then pulled her in through the hair. So tying the hair on the back, if you're wearing a hat or a scarf for whatever reason, make sure that you keep in mind that they might be made by flammable materials. So if you are working with flammable material, you're wearing like a baseball hat, please put it the other way around. If you're wearing a scarf, tie it in inside your lab coat here, so there is less chance of that being exposed to the fire. Other than the safety code, it's important to know also how to behave in the lab. So what is a proper behavior? Well, first of all, you should never work alone. If there is ever an emergency, you want to have someone beside you ready to help you. So you would never work alone or unsupervised. Second thing, you should always go into the lab knowing exactly what you're going to be doing. Obviously, your professor is going to be there, or your manager, wherever it is in your company you're going to be working in, might help you with that. But you should already know ahead of time what you're going to be doing. So you should always review the procedure, the material is going to be involved, the safety concern coming with the chemicals you'll be using. You should plan your experiment so you know exactly what you're going to be using, and then you should also listen obviously to your supervisor, to all the advice they can give you in terms of safety. You should never eat or drink in a lab. All the food and the drinks should be kept outside of the lab. If you have them with you, they should be safely stored inside your backpack or your bag and never be exposed to the lab environment. Okay, so if you have to drink and you have a backpack with you with the drinks inside and the food inside, you take the backpack outside of the lab and then you take the food or drinks out, and vice versa before you come in. You should always minimize distractions as well. So not chatting too much with your partner. I know it's going to happen, but you should minimize the chatting with your partner. Your main focus is to do your lab, all right? And obviously, absolutely no electronic devices, such as your phones or headphones and other types, anything that can be distracting you. Together with that, then you should always minimize the chance of contaminating things or pushing things that then can push a chemical and so on. So you should always keep your space tidy and safe. So you should always have there only what you need. And what you really need there is your lab kit and your lab book to record the experiment, and obviously a pen. Everything else should go underneath the bench or inside a drawer, properly stowed. You should always clean your bench before and after. You don't know if it's dirty before you start. And obviously you don't want to leave it dirty for the next group. Together with that, also you should always turn off any potential dangerous things such as flames, the gas, as well that fuel the flames as well. Also, when you're working, always look around. You might be working perfectly safely, but maybe some of your classmates or colleagues are not doing that. So always look around. It's like when you're driving, drive defensively. In the lab, work defensively. Check around. Some people can make some mistake. And obviously, you should always properly handle and dispose the material in the solution. You don't want to throw a toxic chemical down the sink or volatile toxic chemical down the sink, and everybody else is going to inhale it later on. And obviously, if there is broken glass, any biohazard, such as potentially dangerous bacteria or blood and so on, it should be disposed properly so nobody can get exposed with that or to that. Sorry. Now, when you are working in a lab, also you should familiarize right away with the lab environment. So, and you should look for anything that can help you get out of that place or deal with any potential emergency. So, first thing, make sure that you check where the exits are. Sounds funny, but it's very important. If there is a major explosion or major emergency in general, you got to know how to get out, not only from the lab, but also to get out from the building. So think not only where the exits are, but also where you should go to get downstairs in the and outside of the building if there is a major emergency. You should also localize what is called a safety or emergency station, which is where all the basic material for smaller emergencies is, like a fire. There is a fire hydrant, fire blanket, an emergency phone to connect with security if you have an emergency, and a chemical spill station and a first aid kit. And then locate also there is the washing station, like this one, similar to the one we have in the lab. I'll show it to you in the next slides, which allows you to wash your eyes if it's needed. So this will be the eye washing station. And also there is the full body shower here in case you are affected by a serious contamination. Other than that, you should always review the data sheets and the safety labels of all the chemicals that you use in any of the procedure you're doing in the lab. In that sense, in terms of safety data sheets and labeling, there is a system in Canada which is labeled as WHMIS or named WHMIS, corresponding for Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System. This is a system that basically standardizes how danger should be communicated to workers. Okay, it has several key elements. So classification of hazards and the labeling, properly labeling of chemicals. Any chemical in the lab should follow the WHMIS labeling. And it also tells you that in every lab you should have a material safety data sheet. So a full sheet that gives you all the details about any chemical present there in the lab. Together that they standardize also education and so on. This is not the point this lecture to talk about WHMIS in depth, but what I want to touch with you is the labeling system there. So WHMIS came out with a very, very direct way of basically pointing potential, or through labels, to point potential dangers that you can incur using different material. So here you have some example like this. If you find in a bottle a symbol like that, would mean that consists of a compressed gas. This flammable material oxidizes, so it can easily react as well. Very toxic and so on, all the stuff, biohazard and so on. Now, why is this important in terms of safety or preventing emergencies? Is because if you look at these symbols, you already know what you should do with that chemical. You have a very good idea what to do. For example, you see something that's labeled as compressed gas, you already know it should not be working close to a flame. Similarly, if it's flammable material, right? If it is a health hazard or harmful and so on, you will be wearing gloves. You'll be extremely careful handling that. If it's then harmful by inhalation and so on, as other information can tell you, you obviously will be working a few minutes. So just by looking at some of these symbols, you can cut down the risk of an emergency by 99% guarantee. Now, These are very direct labeling, so now this is still part of the WMS. The WMS dictate also how every chemical in the original bottle and every time that gets divided into other bottles in the lab should be labeled. So this is what we call the supplier label that has all this information that you should be reading. It's the main ones. Already the symbols here tell you already it's flammable, toxic. And here it is, you already know what you should be doing to avoid any emergency. And then this similar information could be given also, should be given also in other bottles that come from the original one. The technician oftentimes aliquots it into smaller bottles, which would have a simpler labeling, which is referred to as the workplace labeling, like this one here, that gives you the key information. So keep away from heat, sparks, redirect, but you have to read it in this case. This is just a generic map. I just put it there just to give you a sense, since you don't have an access to a lab yet, just to give you an idea how a lab is organized. So in our labs, we have all these students' benches here. They used to hold up to 24 students. Now it might be reduced because of COVID. But beside that, you have all the benches here for the students. Then there's a faculty bench with a whiteboard. There's a projector screen here. And then there are benches. All the chemicals are organized in these benches here. And then there are fume hoods where you can go and work with volatile toxic compounds. Together with that, obviously, there are three big things, for me at least, in terms of emergency I want to point to you. First of all, they all have exits. Okay, sounds funny, but this is, to me, the main safety feature in a lab. Now, not only there are exits, but when you look at the exit in a lab and you familiarize yourself with it, you have to also to figure out where they lead. Again, you have to have an escape plan. For example, in many labs, this could lead to another room, a prep room, which then leads to the technician office, and then you get out. So it might be a longer route to escape from a lab, or you may even get stuck if other doors are locked. These will lead to the hallway and then to the fire safety stairs. So this could allow you actually for a faster escape. So you should familiarize yourself with that. Together with that, as I said before, there is an emergency or safety station in a corner that's everything to deal with minor emergency, minor chemical emergency, minor medical emergency, like if someone is dizzy and so on, you can call security and so on. And has first aid kit, fire emergency as well. And then finally, in one of the corners, usually there is a washing station. There is always actually in our labs a washing station with a shower and an eye washing station combined together. This is a picture actually of one of our labs. It's possibly going to be working there. So these are the students' bench I was mentioning to you. They're not curved. It's just an effect, the panorama picture that I took. This is where the faculty will be standing with a whiteboard. There's a projector and so on. But beside that, in terms of emergency, here there is an exit, for example. Here on the left, far left, there will be another exit that you don't see. This is another door that leads to the preparation room. You would not want to use that. There are fume hoods here for volatile toxic chemicals. So these fume hoods, they take the fumes and they throw them in the environment through these ducts here. Together with that, then we have also other safety features here. This is how a safety station or emergency station will look like. So you would have an emergency button here and dialer here. It's not a real phone. We used to have a phone. Now there's just a button that you press and connects you directly to security. When security they hear the buzzer, they already know where it's coming from. So all you would have to tell them that there is an emergency, a medical emergency, somebody's on the ground, somebody's dizzy, please come up. Then there is everything to deal with minor chemical spills here. There are some blankets there to pat if you have to remove the chemicals. There are some heavy-duty gloves, some safety goggles that block the fumes as well. They have carbon filters for the fumes, and then some heavy-duty bags where you can throw contaminated material. You have also a fire hydrant. I'm sure you're very familiar with this for minor fires, and a fire blanket here in case somebody needs it. Together with that, we have also some other basic things to, if somebody cuts themselves, there are some band-aids here, and so on. Usually in the same corner, you will find also here where you can throw away sharp broken glasses, okay, or disposable glass that is sharp. You can put it inside this container here. And finally, in this corner right here in this lab, sometimes it could be on the opposite corner and so on, there is the washing station, so which would have a full shower here. You have to just pull down this trigger here and you will start washing there. And the eye washing station here with two yellow locks, I would call them, that you push down and will start spraying on your face. Now, that's all to prevent emergency, okay? So you be properly dressed, behaving properly, planning to minimize if there is any damage, if there is an emergency. But sometimes emergency happens. How do you deal with that? So there are two types of emergencies I'm gonna mention here. One is a chemical spill, and the second one is a fire emergency. So how would you deal with a chemical spill? There are two possible scenarios. In one case, the spill just affects the bench, the floor, but is not on anybody's clothes. Okay, this is the easiest one to deal with in general. Or the second one is it actually affects one of the students or more students. So in that case, it's on the clothes or on the skin and stuff like that. So in case it does not affect the student, the first thing you should do there is to let me know, to let your instructor or supervisor know immediately. You don't act on your own. Your instructor is the person that's supposed to know everything about the chemicals used in the lab, including the one that would have been spilled. So it would know whether it should just pat it with some paper, throw it out, or it would go to the emergency safety station, take a blanket, wipe it up, so put in the gloves first and so on. So it will lead the cleanup and the evacuation. It could tell you to do it, but you don't do it by yourself. You immediately let your instructor know, okay? And then the instructor will lead everything else. Now, if instead it affects a student, if it affects yourself, for example, first thing you're gonna do is not let the instructor know or the supervisor. Act immediately to minimize the chance of being exposed to that chemical or reduce the time that you are exposed to that chemical. So practically speaking, what you have to do is remove any clothes that are contaminated by that chemical, first thing. And second thing, you gotta start removing that chemical from your skin that could have been exposed. How do you do that? So you immediately go by yourself, take your clothes off, and immediately start washing it using the washing station. So, or you can even use the sink. For example, if it's in your hand, you don't need to do the full shower. You can go to the sink, put your hand under the sink with continuous water flow, cold water flow, okay? And any contaminated area should be washed with continuous water flow for 15 minutes. So if you don't die because of the chemicals, you die of hypothermia usually. No, just kidding. But it should be washed continuously with continuous water flow. Now, if it's in your eyes, you go to the eye washing station. Don't use the sink. You don't want to push water with your hands on your face in a regular sink. The reason is, there are two reasons. First, you might have the chemical in your hands, so you keep putting the chemical in your eyes. Second thing is not continuous water flow. So if you do that, then you will have to go on for an hour instead of 15 minutes. So you go to the eye washing station, push down, keep washing your face with that and your eyes. If it's on the rest of your body, obviously you would use the whole body shower here present in there. Now, if it's obviously it's a major chemical spill, it's not going to happen in our labs. We don't deal with any super toxic chemicals. If it was major, obviously, I would just let you know to get out immediately. Now, how do you deal with instead a fire emergency? Now, if it's a small fire, what do we mean by small fire? Like, let's say there's a little beaker of ethanol, all right, or isopropanol, and there was a Bunsen burner. The Bunsen burner is that tool that produces a flame. by mistake, somebody hits the beaker with the ethanol, it spills, and there is some fire on the bench, small fire on the bench. First thing we should do is immediately go to the fire extinguisher in the safety emergency station, take it out, remove the pin, point a hose, and just do a couple of squirts. Psh, psh, 2 squirts would actually get it out. Okay. Now, instead, if a student is on fire, please do not use the fire extinguisher. You will use the fire blanket, not the fire extinguisher. Now, obviously, if it's a major fire, just get out. Okay, you just get out of the lab. You don't have to let me know. Just run out. And then, obviously, you follow your escape plan. Try to get out also of the building. Together with that, also, please do not spend time looking for your cell phone, your backpack. Just leave everything behind and get out of the lab and the building. Now, together with that, this type of emergency may happen not only in our lab, but also in other labs or other places in the building. So if there is a fire in the building, we have a dual alarm system. At the beginning, you would have a slow beep, beep, beep system, and there will be some communication to let us know that there is an emergency. You don't need to get out. That's just to communicate, to get you ready in case the second alarm comes in, which is a faster beep, 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 beep. At that point, you have to get out immediately from the building. There might be some marshals outside leading you out to towards the fastest way. Otherwise, there is you just have to have your escape plan ready. We're done with safety. Now, the last few slides are about documentation. So how do you keep a proper record every experiment you're going to be doing in the lab? Now, before we talk about that, it's important to understand why you do that. If you understand that, you already understand a good 50-60% of why you do things. So why do you do that? Well, you want to document something permanently, everything you do, including your mistakes. And the point is, because if someone else has to replicate your experiment, should be able to do it exactly the way you have done it, including the mistake leading exactly to the same results. Why is this important? Imagine you're working for a company, okay? You are the one in charge of producing a certain drug, and then you are offered a better position in another company. 2 weeks notice, you leave. You can't, they need to know exactly how you were doing everything. Without 2 weeks is not going to be enough for you to train another person. You might train somebody, but not as well. So you need to give all the information on how you were doing experiments to the person that's going to take over from you. Not only that, but you could be audited. Imagine there is a big case where you are in charge of making a drug, a heart drug, right? And there are some evidence that there is a batch produced by your company, exactly a batch of that drug you're in charge of making, that is giving some health problems to some patients. The company will be audited, okay? And they will be looking into where the problem may stem. And so they should be able to see exactly step by step how the drug was produced, how you were doing it in the lab, and see what was going wrong. So even if you had made mistakes, they should be able, if you had made mistakes, you would not erase them. They should have all the information to do that, all right, to address the thing. So that's important to really document everything you do in the lab. So how you do that? Well, you do it by writing things down in a lab book. Nowadays, there are electric notebooks, okay, so, but in your case, you'll be writing everything down in the lab book. Now, you should always have that lab book with you on your bench or wherever you go. You go to the balance to do some measurement, it comes with you. It's your best friend. That's what I always say. In the lab, your lab book is your best friend. And then you should be collecting your data as soon as you make them, generate them. So what it means that if you're measuring a mass, let's say you have to measure 5 grams, 5.0000 grams of a substance. Then you go to the balance, you measure it, and instead you measure 5.0183 grams. You got to record that right away. in your lab book. Okay, you don't memorize it and then you go back to your bench and you write it down. You might forget it in between. Same thing, you don't write it on a piece of paper and then you copy it in your lab book. It has to be written right away in your lab book. Otherwise, the piece of paper or your memory might fail. Okay, and then you have lost data. And then you have to follow specific standards that are understood by everybody in the field. So it's an international way of understanding how it's done. Now, as I said before, now many companies would use digital lab notebooks. So you just enter with a computer. We still do it with papers. And how do you do it? So you should use lab books. They're carbon copy pages or self-copying carbon-less pages. So basically, lab books that do create two copies of what you're writing. So you're writing on a page, and that page automatically transferred to another page underneath. So you have two copies. So in case someone asks you for the data, you can just give him a copy, and still you have all the information in the lab books. The pages should not be removable and numbered. You don't want anyone to take a page out of that, right? Or bring it to a different companies, or just missing information, right? Everything has to be there. Otherwise, you cannot repeat the experiment the same way. Everything should not be erasable, so it has to be done in ink, not pencil. And you should never, ever white out the things. You can see that if you make a mistake, instead of whiting out or erasing with a pencil, you have it in ink. All you have to do is cross and initials. I'll show you some examples later on. So now here's just a picture to show you how they look. So you can see this will be your lab notebook, and each page could actually consist of 2 pages. So you will be writing this page here, all the generic information, and then here your procedure and so on, and the information will be automatically transferred to a second page here, which then could be taken out. All these pages will be bound to this lab book and should not be removable. It should have a number, page number, and should not be removable. So let's go through an example of how you record your data. So first of all, it should be very easy to find where the lab procedure and all your data are. So you always have to have a very precise index page where you record 3 important things. The page where you can find the information, the title of the lab, and when the lab was done, the date that was done. So for example, your first lab would have been, I should say now, written on page 1, which will be the next page. This doesn't count as page 1. Would have been glassware and pipettes. You would have done it, say, the 20th of January 2016. Now, for the next lab, you don't write on page 2. You write exactly where you start writing. So in this case, let's say glassware and pipettes took you 3 pages. The next one will be on page 4. Will be balances, and that's the date where you would have done it. How does it look when you record? So on the top, you have basically a section there where you write all the basic information. So you got to write down the title of the lab, the number and the title. So in the first one will be experiment number 1, glassware and pipettes. When you've done it, and then you should write your name, your course, your section, and whoever you do it with. I've been in school with Albert Einstein. I'm old enough. No, I'm just kidding. But that's just an example there. Now, that's for generic information. So this is for all the labs you're doing. Then together with that, you will always start with a goal. You have to explain why you're doing an experiment. What are you aiming to do? Say if you're working for a company, say I'm producing drugs so and so, producing X amount. So in our case, obviously in this case will be, this is a very simple lab to master the use of lab glassware and so on, grass pipette. You state why you're doing it. And then you should have a procedure. There are 2 ways you can do the procedure. You can either write it, the full procedure, usually on the left side here, step by step. Or, to save you time, oftentimes there are common binders of procedure or common files. You can just write a reference to where the procedure can be found. So in this case, this is for a different course. So introduction, that's the lab manual, and you indicate which page where you can find the procedure that you used. However, sometimes you change the procedure. We like to change them all the time, change the concentration of chemicals, volumes, and so on. So you have to write anything that deviates from that procedure. So you should write the change procedure here. For example, in step number 2 of the procedure that you cited here, instead of using a 100 milliliter beaker, you have used a 50 milliliter beaker. And your observations. Observations are important to remind you. If you have to redo this experiment and repeat it, it should remind you what you're expecting to see. Or let's say it goes wrong, your observation will put, oh, that's where it was supposed to be clouded, but it was translucent, something like that. So you always write down anything that you notice, or the solution turned from red to blue. Write it down. You know whether you are on the right track or not next time. Together with that, you should record the data. So you should have a section for your results. So where you record different things, the mass of the beaker, the water, and so on. And then a separate section where you do all your calculations. So how did you calculate the mass of the water? It's about subtractions. These are just examples there. And then if you make any mistake, I was saying before, all you have to do, you cannot white it out, you cannot erase it, you just do a line, you explain why you did it. In this case, it was a calculation error, and then you initial with your own initial. And finally, you write your conclusions. What did you learn out of your experiment? What did you get out of that? So the production of your drug was successful. I could achieve X grams and so on of drugs. And then finally, any empty space has to be filled before you leave your lab. The reason being that you don't want anyone, nor yourself, to add any more information in the empty space. So any empty space should be covered with a double line, initial, and then dated as well. Okay, in this case, there will be also your supervisor signing there. Now, one important thing I want to point to you, and basically we are at the end here of this recording, is how you can summarize your data if you want, or your conclusion as well sometimes, using tables instead of writing things just by. So for example, look at this. These are 2 measurements done of certain volumes. That's something that you would have done in the glass pipette experiment. And so you have a measurement 1 where you measure the beaker with the water, then you calculate the difference here. Measurement 1, so on. Okay, that's a way you could have recorded. There is a better way though to do that. It's by using tables. So in tables, what you can do, you can basically create columns where you have the common items. So in this case, it's the number of the measurement. Here will be the mass of the beaker. You express which unit it is in grams, so you just have to write the numbers at this point. Beaker plus the 10 milliliter, and so on right here. The advantage of tables is they're very quick to look at and also make the analysis of your data much more quick. You can compare things much more quickly. So here, for example, okay, this beaker, where's the other one? I gotta search to the whole thing. Oh yeah, there it is, the other beaker. So it makes comparison much faster, save you space as well overall, and then it helps doing the data analysis and draw conclusion just by looking at a specific table. So we're done with this. Please also don't forget to download and submit the assignment as well associated with these lab theory lecture.